Welcome to Elevating Consciousness, the podcast that brings you mind-expansive conversations into the heart of what matters most. I'm your host, Artem, and our guest today is Darlene Tataryn, a counselor, somatic educator, and coach who guides clients through somatic emotional release and helps them map their internal emotional landscapes for healing and self-development. She's the founder of Relational Dojo, a welcoming space where kind humans come together to co-create curious and courageous conversations. Ali is also the co-founder of Sacred Somatic Events, a sober somatic dance experience that warmly invites participants into full-spectrum self-expression. Her primary training is in counseling, expressive arts, and somatic education. Ali has completed over 260 hours of Kundalini Yoga Teacher Training and is a certified T3 Circling Facilitator through the Integral Center. She's also a meditation teacher certified under Upasaka, Culadasa, and Junpo, Roshi, with extensive personal practice in the Namgyal-Kagyu tradition under teachers such as Lama Lodro, Lama Sidney, Lama Rodney Devinish, and her mother, Dr. Darlene Tataryn. Ali proudly collaborates with her father, clinical psychologist, Dr. Douglas J. Tataryn, facilitating and coaching through his Bio-Emotive Framework. In this episode, we speak about Ali's experience growing up with parents deeply entrenched in emotional and spiritual work, her experience with acting and how that connected to inner work, the Bio-Emotive Framework, how emotional processing can complement circling and relational practice, and so much more. Enjoy. Darlene Tataryn, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah. So I want to set a bit of context before we dive in. I had your father, Douglas Tataryn, on one of the earlier episodes of this podcast a couple years back. And I've also worked a bit with the Nadera process, which is a core component of the Bio-Emotive Framework, which your father created and that you work with. And I'll be sure to link to that episode in the show notes for anyone interested. I imagine there'll be some overlap between that conversation and ours today, but I also hope that there'll be fresh perspectives and an opportunity to kind of go deeper into that territory. So, although I've been acquainted with your father's work, recently I had the chance to go deeper into it by participating in your emotional clearing crash course, where you both teach the theory of the Bio-Emotive Framework and also help guide participants into the practice of emotional clearing. And I really can't recommend it enough for anyone looking to better understand and more skillfully process their emotions. It's clear to me that you're both a deep embodiment and an extension of your father's work. And I just want to take a moment to honor you for that.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, and I imagine we'll explore the Bio-Emotive Framework more deeply as we go. But I'd love to begin by hearing what it was like for you to grow up with a father so immersed in emotional work. You mentioned during the course that your father had a very difficult upbringing and that both your parents are cycle breakers, meaning they were able to heal much of their trauma rather than pass it on to their children. So what was it like for little Ali growing up in that kind of environment?
Yeah, what a great question. I can't really answer that question without also acknowledging my mother.
Yeah, for sure.
Just as deep in the work as a therapist and in meditation. It was great. I mean, I had an idyllic childhood. They taught me at a very, very young age how to communicate and how to listen and how to apologize when I did something, that wasn't right, and empathy, how to actually say, like, how do you think they feel? If you're taking his stuff, how do you think they feel if yada, 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 yada. And I think I appreciate that more and more as I get older. I will say, I remember when my dad had a shift into like therapy, because he used to be a statistician, right? And then he made a change into the clinical world. And I remember crying one day, devastated about something. And he started to ask me, "Oh, and where do you feel the sadness? Is it in your chest or in your belly?" "Oh, it's in my chest." "And what color is it?" And I remember distinctly going, "Oh, it's yellow." "And is it moving or is it still?" And I was like, "It's moving." And I was like 7 years old and having this, whoa, I mean, this is Gendlin's focusing, right? And that was the beginning of not just kind of like being good to your neighbor, but the beginning of practicing self-awareness. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful that both of your parents had that kind of background. I was actually researching your mom too. I know she's went really deep with meditation, and like you said, she's also a therapist and done this kind of work. So that's awesome. And then, something I always think about is this notion that, sometimes people have amazing childhoods, but there's still so much work to do. And, like kind of the difference between big T and little T trauma sometimes people talk about, and like how there's like little things that aren't met, or just could be a dynamic with a sibling. And then, I mean, there's other things, right? It's not just the parents. It's also like what, we go out into the world, even if you have this like amazing environment, you go out into the world and then it's like, not everybody's going to love you the way your parents love you.
Dude, you're asking the best questions. Like my brother actually said that to my mom. He said, "You gave us too good of a childhood. We weren't prepared for the real world." I can relate to that. Now, I will say, my parents often have said, no matter how good you are, your kids are going to end up a little bit messed up. And really, we just have to give them the tools to be able to make their way through the best that they can. And I can definitely relate to that. Like, I grew up in a small town. I was the daughter of the meditators and the vegetarians. I was weird, borderline autistic. Like, I had my own kind of journey through reality. And yeah, I mean, I experienced some really intense traumas in my early 20s and this is where a lot of my mom's work really came into play. I had to start figuring out how come such a well-balanced kid like me is ending up in so many bad situations. And that has been a really interesting pursuit. And I think that's how I've ended up, at this point, the base of all my work is just somatics and dharma and learning how to align with loving kindness. But I think sweet, loving kids end up in really bad situations. And I would say I was one of those kids. And so learning how to discern through loving kindness, learning how to figure out, why am I getting magnetized to certain types of people? Why am I getting magnetized to certain types of situations? And through that, at this point, I feel like a really whole human being, but yeah, sorry, I could, yeah, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's this notion of that life is always messy. And, the notion of the good enough parent, it's like, as long as you're good enough, then you don't create this massive or like complex trauma in the child. But that doesn't mean that, they're not going to have issues. I think like another thing that you were mentioning, and I forget the exact words you were using in the course, but I think it was like the difference between like trauma stuff and like personality stuff. And like a lot of stuff is just like, we have a particular kind of personality and we're pushing against the world, right? It's like, this is who I am, or this is who I want to be. This is what I want to do. And then the world's like, well, no, this is who you got to be. And this is what you got to do. And it's like this kind of tension that exists there. And I think a lot of like the therapeutic path and the meditative path is like harmonizing that. Like, how do you harmonize this notion of self and other, or objective and subjective? Like, how do you harmonize that? How do you bring that into harmony? So like, even if you don't have that crazy trauma, it's like you're still going into the world and all these factors at play, and all these people and stuff.
Yeah, you're navigating. I love the way, I first heard it from Ken, the me and the we, right? You're having to navigate this autonomy with this relatedness. And we are all part of not just cultures, but systems, and systems that work, and they work in a certain way, right? And it really works. If you grow up, you graduate, you go to university, you make some money, you build your home, you build your family. There's a fundamental goodness to that way of doing things, right? But then the trouble is what about the person who's like deviating? And then I think going to like the personality, personality trauma that shapes a personality. It's when you're not able to follow that inner guidance or that inner desire from a young age, or you're not getting feedback about, hey, you're part of the collective. So you can't just do everything that you want at a young age. And it's like, if you end up in one of those two extremes, you end up with, it's like a compensation, right? And this wound compensation starts becoming who you know yourself to be. And when you start knowing who yourself, when you start relating to yourself through the result of resistance, or the result of struggle or self-advocation, then schisms start to develop. And as we get older, we need those because we're protecting some sort of vital truth about who we are. But it can kind of start to take over as we get older, and that's where having that flexibility and that capacity to kind of ask myself, hey, I'm noticing I'm getting into similar situations. I'm noticing that I'm playing certain things out. I wonder if maybe I'm bringing something to the table. And I think the freedom, I think you have to have tasted, whether it's through, healthy childhood, a good teacher, or like some spiritual experience, there's a profound amount of self-love that you have to be able to have for yourself it's not just self-love. I hate that word. Self-knowing, self-forgiveness. And I think you have to I think people don't really have the ability to forgive themselves in their imperfections if other people haven't been able to show them forgiveness. And so it becomes, for me, we're in a time in our culture right now where it's very, I love Di Hamilton's words, in vogue. It's very in vogue to advocate for yourself. I think we're really missing it. People really won't know kindness, and they won't be able to give kindness if it hasn't been given to them. And people can't really know forgiveness. And hey, it's okay that you've made a mistake. And in fact, I have to acknowledge you have made a mistake. In fact, this behavior really wasn't good. In fact, it's created a lot of damage. And on some level, it's okay. Like on some level, it's just a mistake that was made and we can learn from this. And it's that feeling of, to me, that's actual self-love. It's that feeling of like, oh, I am different than my behaviors. And so I can just get curious about my behaviors and change them. And I think a lot of personality, not that I'm trained in this field at all, but like personality dynamics or, schisms or whatever, it's often just somehow someone's whole hasn't been sat with. And I think if I were to, it's like I'm on the team, I'm in the army of people that's like, let's be able to sit with people's whole selves, even the difficult, and try to support that. And there's a lot of people out there doing that, saying we can start to love these difficult, less good parts.
Yeah. What you're saying, it's bringing up, I was emailing back and forth with this practitioner I met at actually a monastic academy, and he's doing like a kind of extensive meditative training right now. He's like in a long retreat, and he was with this inquiry of like, how does a bodhisattva deal with a narcissist? And like, that's the whole thing. Like you're saying, like people don't know how to be kind if people aren't kind to them, but it's like, it's those people that are the most difficult to deal with and to be kind with, right? It's like somebody who's completely narcissistic and not empathetic. And that's the person that's really hard for people to have empathy and compassion for. But at the same time, it's like, if we're called to this kind of work, that's like the edge of it. That's like what's really needed. If you see kind of a lot of political leaders and a lot of people that end up in these positions of power, they have very strong narcissistic traits, if not full-blown narcissistic personality disorder. So it's like the kind of the people that are, creating the wars and like pushing the buttons are often the people that haven't gotten that love. And it's like, that dynamic is like playing out. So that's like, it feels like that's the edge of, what our society needs in terms of healing.
Well, and that is, this is really interesting. There's kind of a classic thing. It's like the empaths end up with a narcissist because a regular person wouldn't put up with their bullshit, right? And so there's, so first of all, I have to kind of remind us all, like the term narcissism it's a label and it's a concept, right? And it's really easy. It's become a very, it's an important concept and label for people to be able to relate to. But I always have to ask, well, what exactly do we mean when we say narcissist, right? And let's try to articulate like the 3 to 5 key pieces there. And then it suddenly starts to become a little bit easier to break down and work with. But I'll say, and I've had to be around my share of narcissists, empathetic woman as I am. I think that's something we have lost in the last, 20, 30 years, depending on where you're hanging out, is a certain sense of right and wrong. And I think that when you can have empathy, deep empathy, and maintain a very deep sense of clarity of this is wrong, like this behavior is causing suffering. This, my mom would always ask me that, talk about an intense childhood. My mom would say, I was a teenager, she would say, well, Allie, you just ask yourself, Is this action contributing to the downgoing of suffering on this planet, or is it not? Like, whoa, what a question. But it's a good question. It's a great question, right? And then you have to get a little bit existential about it because you realize the interconnectedness of things. But going back, I think there's, as we have become more complex and we're having to navigate the multiplicity of the worldviews everywhere, and we're having to make systems now that accommodate all of these worldviews everywhere, it's become very difficult for people to be able to articulate what is right and what is wrong, right? And that's not in the sense of black and white thinking or good, bad, but it's kind of this sense of like, something feels wrong about marketing that way. But then we kind of get talked out of it, or something feels wrong about how that person is talking to that person. Well, who am I to say? And I think it's the empaths and this lack of right and wrong together means that we don't know how to hold people accountable. And then people that maybe started off as just trying to advocate for themselves, they don't discern between self-serving things and what is needed for the group. And then that's how the narcissists kind of grow up and get to stay that way. And I think that's a concern for me, is how can we have compassion and accountability at the same time? And we seem to be in a very big polarity between brutal accountability or like wussy compassion. Yeah.
Yeah. So, one of the things I was, thinking about when you were speaking is this, I think this term is called like drishti, but it's like this notion of like connecting to like a vision or something within yourself. And it's like when that gets distorted, that ability to discern, people can't discern. And you see that with like complex trauma, and you see that with personality disorders and these kind of things. And now it's like the culture of like postmodernism, where everything is just relativized. Like well, that's just your opinion. It's just all opinions. There's no notion of objective truth, good or beauty. Like that gets kind of demolished. That's like, it's a cultural thing. And then it's also like being able to actually develop that discernment and then see like, oh, that's a postmodern view, or these are kind of the blind spots of post-modernity for whatever that, for all the positives that it's brought. There's also this notion of like everything gets relativized, and there is no notion of a vision of the true, good, and the beautiful.
Yeah, it kind of breaks my heart that Integral Institute and Integral Life never got a chance to really disseminate those teachings to the public at large, because I think it's just so helpful to have the languaging, like to have that as a framework, even if you don't buy into it completely. Because I think there's a lot of people grappling with the same stuff. They just don't know how to refer to it. And so when in doubt, I think a lot of people do err on, well, respect and give care. I don't want to try to say that my view is more important. And then, we're in the extremism. But yeah, compassion and care in this world is that's why it's, wisdom, compassion, and skillful means in Vajrayana. It's all three. Learning that. But it's a journey, right? We all have to learn that for ourselves.
For sure. And, speaking about journeys, another commonality that I see in our journeys is that we both pursued artistic paths early on. So I spent many years immersed in hip hop, trying to make a career out of rap. And I know you were an actress for quite some time. Now here we both are exploring a similar space of healing, awakening, and inner work. So I'm curious to hear more about your experience as an actress. What role did that play in your journey, and how did you end up transitioning to like the work you're doing now?
Yeah. Well, I think there's acting as a practice, and then there's the career. And I have to say, like, artists and actors, they are, in my world, I mean, they most of them are living what so many practitioners are pursuing. So many, it's like the ones that have a very deep relationship to their creative process, they know how to empty out and wait, for the insight or the idea or the muse to start to move through them. And I think for me, I got into it. Well, so my mom was a dancer growing up, and she taught ballroom dance. She was a ballet dancer. So dance was a big part of her world. She did expressive dance as a therapist. So it was part of my reality. But I would just get into such deep states of calm and creativity as I'm like, lead with your elbow through the room, and like, what's it like now to lead with your nose? And they get you into these very bizarre ways of moving through space. And yeah, by the time a weekend training is done, you're just like, I'm a fundamentally different person than I was. Whatever this was, this is really good. And later, as I got into my Zen practice, there was like basically a pointing out experience, right, of like natural mind. And I was like, oh, I already know what that is. This is what I have to do for acting. This is what we do, is we have to be with the fundamental spaciousness. And then we have to create a character as though it's real, fully embodied, fiercely in the unknown, and yet knowing exactly how it's all going to go, all at the same time. It's like, oh yeah, that's what Trump was talking about. It's just very, it's a very precise form of self-awareness, of no self, because you're not the character, right? And so I think, yeah, I mean, y'all, it's just fun. Like, it's like, and then you find out you get paid to do it. You're like, yeah, I'm going to do that. Like, yeah, it's incredible. It does become different, like I say, in the career piece, right? Especially in the film industry, right? Things are kind of like chopped up, and you have to do things in a different order, and you're not necessarily able to like follow certain arcs. There's a lot there, but
yeah, this is really fascinating. This notion of like what you brought in, this notion of practice, acting as a practice, and acting as a career. And some of what you're saying is, it sounded like acting was like this practice that for you gave you tastes of awakening. And I started thinking about like Jim Carrey. Like he's like, I feel like he's like a big kind of example of somebody who's a huge actor, one of the hugest actors in the world, that through his acting kind of has this no self-realization, this notion that he's not the ego, and that there's all these characters he's playing. But it's really interesting because if you look at Hollywood at large, just Hollywood in general is just very like the antithesis of like awakening, or that it's just this, it's rather than tapping into your true nature, like a lot of it is like it's like more fake. And if you look at a lot of, I see you want to say something. I'll just say one more thing. It's like, if you look at a lot of there's a lot of actors that kill themselves, actresses and actors that end up killing themselves, get depressed. They make all this money and they just get consumed by their careers, end up using drugs, all this kind of stuff. So it's really interesting, this kind of dialectic that I'm seeing coming up.
Okay, so much to say about that. So I want to talk about the value, and then maybe come back to the dysfunction and like the suicides and the drug use and all of that kind of side of things. So in my pursuits of life, are you here? So here's what I have found, and this is really, really important. Really, really important. Somewhere I lucked out in my training. Here's what happens. You've got basically spacious, fundamental, natural mind. Wow. Okay, you don't call it that, but you experience it and you realize it. But then there's thought, story, assumption, thought, story, assumption. Oh, thought, story, oh. And these pieces, okay, if you have the insight, forget about this spacious awareness. If you realize I am not my thought and my story, oh, but now I'm having a different series of thoughts and stories. Oh, now I'm having this. I'm going to call that a roller coaster. So this is, right, the mystic swims in the waters that the psychotic drown in. The dysfunctional actor, the dysfunctional person with a spiritual pursuit, they've had an insight. They've had a certain type of insight of no self or non-self or not self. And to me, those are three different insights. But they are identifying fully with this until this one, until this one, until this one. Or they're saying, well, I'm none of these. But the problem is in order to say I'm not this, they have to become that. And in order to say I'm not that, they have to become this. And that is schizophrenia or psychosis or bipolar disorder, right? It's a fragmented self. But if you, and I have gotten through some very tough situations, if you have someone point out to you or somehow you notice it yourself, this very deep rest between these parts, then this is what you start, this is the ground. You start to identify with this as self, and these just become arisings. But if you don't have this as self, then you have a scattered self all over the place. And so I think a lot of actors are having incredible, and people honestly doing a lot of different drugs too, they're having profound awakening of not self, but they haven't had the awakening of, I'm going to say, deeper self, or the part that is beneath the arising of my own personality. And that can be very scary. And this is where I think that's a major difference in my world. I was listening to the Dan Brown, Michael Taft interview, where if you, oh, I just lost my thought. What did I just say?
Dan Brown. Dan Brown, Michael Taft interview.
Right before that. Shoot.
I mean, I think you were really, what I was hearing you say is this notion of like, if you could connect to the unconditioned, then the different conditioning it's not a problem because you're not identified with it. But I guess you know, the other thing you were saying is you were saying that some actors or actresses are having certain taste of awakening, but they're not touching into the ground. So yeah, I'm not sure how you're thinking about that differently.
Right. So that's the difference between modern day mindfulness practices. And people are getting into Buddhism thinking they're getting into like cute mindfulness. But the reality is these things are set up to deconstruct your reality and help you realize a fundamental nature far beyond the arising and falling of this fucking world, let alone your feelings. Right. And so I think people are accidentally stumbling into look, a lot of people teach mindfulness and most people can barely get to, you know, they get to a place of calm. But some people, they start doing mindfulness and they get to that place of calm really quickly.
Yeah.
And then you go deeper than the calm, right? And if you start stumbling into insights of no self without a teacher that's grounded in what that is, you can start having fear responses in the body, right? And if you don't know how to navigate fear responses, people can start having really intense identity crises, right? And it can be too much. And so I referred to Dan because a lot of people who are on a significant path to awakening, some people are getting into it because they just want to reduce the stress and they want to just feel better. And some people are getting into it because they hate this world and they want to like escape it entirely. And those are two very different starting points, right? So yes, people are accidentally, not just actors, but I think people on the spiritual path sometimes are getting into something that it's not actually what they were trying to do. And when you're having an insight of no self, when all you want is to just like have a nice home and a nice job, which is good. I wouldn't ever discount that. Like it's good if you're not so broken that you're having to try to cut through all of reality. Like we tend to come to spiritual, like when you're really pursuing a spiritual path, it's because you're you're really suffering and you're trying to get to something that doesn't suffer. Right. But you have ironically, you can end up going through a lot of suffering to get to the point of no suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, I was talking, the last episode I did was with Delson Armstrong. And he's been kind of a pretty big figure in the pragmatic Dharma space recently, and kind of a lot of like controversial stuff has been bubbling up with him. But, we were talking about how like actually like the start of the spiritual path is like actually realizing that you're suffering. Like he was talking about like a friend that he could clearly see this person was suffering, but he could see that this person was not even aware that they were suffering. So it's like in one way of looking at the spiritual path is like becoming very aware of your suffering. There was this other quote. It was like something like, oh, happiness comes down to either being like controlled by your afflictive states or like being aware of them. Like either way, there's going to be suffering, and it's going to be like the unconscious reactivity and like numbing yourself and like doing all this stuff not to see it, or it's going to be facing it and seeing it and, dealing with that. So either way, you're going to suffer. It's like, which way are you going to do it, in a conscious way or in an unconscious way?
Well, and that's the first noble truth, right? And the first noble truth is not just an idea. It's like, it's a brutal realization. Like, and what you just said, like, that's the dilemma, right? Like, we're suffering, whether you know it or not. And I think for me, for me, the real spiritual path begins when you realize the suffering you're causing other people. Because
for sure. Yeah.
You're like, I am part of a web of interconnectedness, and I am infecting people. And now I have to learn how to deal with that. And it's like, on one level, you just have to make peace with it. On another level, you're like, no, I can change.
Yeah. I think that's also the difference between like a Theravada lens, where it's all about I'm suffering and I need to get out of the suffering. And the Mahayana lens is like the world is suffering and how can I help alleviate that?
Oh, isn't that true? Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
The other thing that, you were speaking to before is that I was thinking about, and, the quote you said, like the mystic swims in the waters that the psychotic drowns. It's like that. There's such a thin line in this kind of work. So you see people lose, like, I don't know. I'm just thinking of like Heath Ledger and like him, like playing, being able to play the Joker on like that kind of a level, like incredible. Right. And then at the same time struggling and using substances and taking his life. And it's like there's this thin line. And especially it's like, a lot of time it's easy to see somebody doing that and it's like, oh, they were just so completely lost and confused. But it's like they could actually be like in very like deep spiritual territory and just struggling to navigate that. It's like it's such a thin line. That's what I'm getting at.
And I think I had a teacher once say to me, I did a background. It was like, I'm not even in the movie, but I got paid for a whole summer to keep showing up to set to play an angel. And I started to have some really intense experiences. And my teacher said, well, yeah, what do you think? You're tapping into the archetype of an angel. And I think that people really underestimate actors, archetypes. Heath, look at the archetype that he was tapping into. Look what he was representing. Look what he was fighting for. Look at what he was, like there's a selflessness, I think, in that work, but again, no guidance. I think he was trying to do justice to, an endless world of suffering and the interconnection of that suffering. And I think, we just don't have the tools. And I'll also just say, as an actor, you get high, talk about dopamine. You end up in transcendental experiences where you are not self, you are something else. You are so fiercely in the moment. And then it's over and your whole body is like, right. And there's something chemical happening. Like I had to take 3 months once after a show. And it took me long, like, I know a lot about the nervous system now more than I did 15 years ago, right? But your body has to recover. It's like entering into these transcendental states. It's like doing ayahuasca nonstop for a month and having to like live a regular, like, oh yeah, how was lunch? Oh yeah, let's go to craft. Like it's like really intense. And if you don't have the resources, if you don't have the food, if you don't have the vitamins and minerals in your body, let alone someone like giving you a hug because you're completely deconstructed, yeah, it's a mess. It's a total mess. It's a total mess.
Yeah.
And it's addictive.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear a little bit more too about like your experiences being an actress. For me, before I really got into like inner work and psychedelics and all this, I was pursuing rap. And for me, I was, it seems like for you it was different. And, you had a different upbringing where you were taught about emotions and how to regulate that, which I wasn't. Like, that all came later for me. But I was very immersed in the identity of a rapper. Like, I didn't have this notion of parts. I didn't have this notion of parts. Like, this is who I was. This is who I was going to be. And when that, because of life circumstances, that wasn't working out, and I realized, oh, actually I have to pivot and do other things, that was like an existential kind of like identity crisis. It was like, whoa, that's what took me on the spiritual path, because that was like the no self. I was like, what? I thought I was this person, but now I'm not. So who am I now? I have no clue. I don't know. Right. And that's the self-questioning comes in. That's the inquiry. Who am I? All of that is coming for me. So I guess I'm wondering, what was like, did you have, well, first of all, like, did you want to do acting from a young age? Was that like an ongoing thing? Was like your identity wrapped up in it? And then, you mentioned like the practice and the career. Like, did you at some point get caught up in the career? Like, I'm just curious to hear more about like how you related to acting, what your experience was with that.
Yeah. So from the like, my first, maybe it was an insight. My first experience acting was, so it's kind of the opposite. Okay. When I was 6, 7 years old, I was playing cops and robbers in my friend Alana's basement, and I was being chased, and the whole world stopped for a second when I went, why am I afraid? This is just a pretend game. You are not actually a robber being chased. But in that moment, I realized, like, something's happening here. I'm not who I think I am, because I'm reacting as though I'm somebody else in a different circumstance. And then I got into acting in grade 10 and 11, 12 in high school. And that came up a lot for me. Like, the whole point was for me to become somebody else. That's why I got into acting, because I felt really limited in the life circumstances that I had. I was the weird kid. I was all of these things. And so I was like, yeah, I get to literally become a different human being. And so a lot of my journey has maybe been a little bit opposite of most. I had to start creating a coherent sense of self, because I think I got maybe disidentified with self so young. And, I'm immersed in spiritual practices and all of these things. Wasn't very easy for me to advocate for myself or to ask for things. So that becomes a challenge when you're on set having to advocate for yourself, which is a whole other thing. But yeah, I think I really enjoyed I liked becoming other people. And this is where I realized I was doing something more. And I was like, I think acting came from something other than like the film industry and theater. Like, I think this is a spiritual thing, because you start doubt, it's like people are writing scripts, a well-written script, like the character just comes into you. You're not thinking this through. It's just happening. And I realized that I was like, I think I'm interested in like channeling. I think I like to be directed. I like to be so empty that I get shaped. And that's not, the best way to live your actual life, but in a very precise container. It's a really cool experience to really just be shaped by the elements or the influences around you. And so once I started to realize that I had a disposition towards that, like kind of not self. Again, Di Hamilton, she's coming up again. I've like barely worked with her one-on-one, but I've attended enough of her stuff. She just says profound things. She just was like, yeah, you need therapy. I was like, oh, I've got to figure out who I am. I've got to like create a sense of self that wants something and that will actually try to pursue something and that will actually try to create something. And I think, honestly, if I didn't have that, like I have the disposition, I would have just sat by the river. Like I could have become homeless. Like I just didn't have any interest in the usual world. And, thank God that I never ended up down a path like that. But, there's Leonard Cohen. He says the light comes in. What is it? The light comes
through
in
the cracks.
The cracks, right?
Yeah.
And I never got that. I think about that all the time, and I never understood it. And just in the last couple of years, I was like, oh, like people with trauma, it's like you have this sense of self, and the trauma happens, and it's like, and this like little split happens, and in that little split, you realize something other than you. And then it just becomes, how do you pursue that, or how do you work with that? But yeah. And I love acting. Just like kind of circling back, I had just quit for a few years. I didn't know how to advocate for myself. I didn't know how to communicate. Now I teach communication classes. I didn't know a lot of things. And career-wise, I was in Winnipeg. I didn't really believe that anything was possible for me. There was a lot of just kind of mindset stuff that I had to kind of work with. And actually, just in the last year, I started auditioning again. And
oh, wow.
I love it. Oh my God. I'm like, I need to train people to go run all of my courses for me, because all I want to do is write and direct and act again.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
I love it.
Yeah. I was curious about that, because it seemed like, oh, there was like the past life of the actress, and then it's like kind of the new life of like the somatic educator, counselor, coach. And then it seems like now you're coming back to that, figuring that out again.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons I had to quit acting was because it just was empty. And I was like, this has just become soulless. This is not like, what am I doing? And I knew that I had so much healing through acting. I was like, the world needs this. People need to know how to move their bodies. People need this. So that was always a thing that I wanted to do. And so I just like cut it off. I shaved my head. I got piercings and tattoos. I was like, I'm not acting. I'm setting a boundary. And I pursued all of this. And now I'm like, oh, I'm really happy with, it's like I've created the thing that I didn't have before. I feel like a way more whole and complete person. I miss acting. Like I miss being around creative weirdos. Like creatives are a certain brand of human that are my human. And, so, yeah, I mean, I'm tempted to ask you about your process with like music and how you relate to it on a creative level and where that kind of fits in. Because you don't just like leave your love for music behind.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know if you ever could, if you're really like, I feel like I have a lot of unprocessed pain around that, because I think I was so entrenched in that. I'm still like, I constantly watch, like, I don't listen to music as much because I find like a lot of the hip hop stuff, I find like a lot of it is just negative. And like I'll watch little videos here and there. It's like a guilty pleasure for me, but I don't like spend hours listening to that stuff. But yeah, I mean, I just attended a buddy of mine in the liminal space, Jacob Krischer. He's a rapper, and he's been like kind of integrating rap with consciousness work. And he just had a session that he did on this platform called Philosophy Portal that another practitioner, Cadell Lass, runs. And he was kind of talking about his experience, and there's another artist, Jordan Bates. He's also a rapper, and he's in this space, and he's doing like consciousness work and working with psychedelics, and then also rapping. So it's been really interesting to see people like that integrating it. For me, like, I left that behind. Right. Then I came back. I released a couple of songs. I think you listened to a couple of my songs. So I released a couple of songs, and I've been writing and stuff and recording. And I actually have probably a good 8 or so songs that I'm going to end up releasing, because a buddy of mine was like pressuring me. He's like, why are you sitting on this stuff? Just put it out. So yeah, there's definitely like this, like I want to do more of it, and like, how do I find the time and the energy, given the fact that I have 2 kids, I have financial responsibilities, I have other interests where I want to learn, and I have the podcasts and my meditative practice and other things that I do. So it's like, how do I bring that back? But it's definitely something like, it's there. I've been like writing and recording since I was really young. Since like 12 years old, I was writing, and probably I was recording since I was 16. And I mean, I spent years immersed in it. So it's like that part of you, especially, this is something I learned about music, is that the music you grow up on, that you're listening to when you're going through puberty, there's something about that gets like deeply entrenched, and like you can't like change that. So like, I'll always like hip hop and rap, like the sound of it, like, and there's no way around that. So it's like, it's a part of me, And yeah, I mean, it was really fun kind of riffing on all the stuff about acting and my own experiences as an artist. I didn't think we would go down this lane so much, but it was really fun. So I'm glad we did. But I also want to touch on the Bio-Emotive Framework, and maybe it makes sense because you kind of take all this artistic energy, all these emotions, all this intensity that we have as humans, and then how do we hold that? How do we work with that? And I think maybe the Bio-Emotive Framework can fit in. So what is it? What are the different aspects of it, and how do they come together to help us better understand and process our emotions?
Yeah, I love that. So I think it's really important for me to emphasize, like, there's the whole framework itself, and then there's like the little emotional processing piece that we teach. But not to confuse the little emotional processing piece with the entire framework, because when you learn the whole framework, it's like, oh, that's why that works when I'm in dance class, or like, oh, that's why this, like, it just helps things make sense. And then, and then it's like, it kind of fills in the gaps to things. But then if you're actually doing the emotional processing itself, you start to, you can play with it. Like, you can start like deconstructing yourself a little bit. But yeah, so the whole framework itself is basically just saying, it came out of a time before, like, the vagus nerve, before parts work was really popularized, right? And it was all around, but it wasn't popular. My dad basically, he was part of, everything was CBT. And he basically just said, feel it. There's, emotions matter. If there's something about crying that's healing, and I want to make it okay for people to cry, and advocate for that. And then he just kind of got more nuanced with how that works. Articulating, okay, there's actually a difference between emotions and feelings, and you actually don't have an emotion. You're not going to get angry unless a feeling, a ting, helplessness got tinged, or, insignificance got tinged, or whatever. And so when you have that map, for me, I use it all the time. I'm just like, oh, I notice I'm feeling super insecure right now. I notice that I can't stop checking my phone. Like, I wonder why. And then I can start kind of figuring it out. And then I don't have to spend all of, what's nice about it is I think mindset work is really important. And I guess maybe I haven't done a good job of explaining what the framework is. Maybe I'm just assuming people know what it is. But I think mindset work is really, really important. But it can be extraordinarily exhausting if you're constantly trying to override what is. And I think that's a big piece about how it actually fits into Dharma practice. You have to just accept what is. And what is I feel crappy right now, or I just yelled at someone, or I just did something that's totally out of alignment with who I want to be. And if you can't, you have to be able to do that. And then you can go, oh, but I'm a conditioned human being, and here's probably why I did it. They were tinging, certain feelings that go really deep that I felt afraid to feel in that moment. And now I'm in a safe space and I'm going to actually explore, was I feeling bad? Was I feeling guilty? Was I feeling abandoned? And again, it's okay. It's just a feeling. It's not your entire identity, right? It's permission to just realize that I'm wired to feel feelings and I can't really transcend my way out of it, but I can feel the feeling until it's gone, and then I can move on, and I don't have to make a whole identity around avoiding feelings either. So, yeah. Does that help? Does that answer? Should I explain what it is? Maybe you should.
Yeah. No, I mean, I guess, I understand enough, but it would be more probably helpful to kind of unpack some of the pieces that are important. Maybe like the notion of core feelings. Yeah. And then, and maybe Nadera. I know I've spoke with your father about that too, but maybe just giving them a little bit more of like the tool around it, like what the tool and how do we use it? How do we think about it? Yeah.
So there's a few different ways you could frame it, but basically the framework, bio-emotive, biological, emotional framework is, it buys into the idea that we have 3 different brain systems, and each one of those brain systems are looking for different things at different times: the reptilian brain, the limbic system, the emotional brain, and the intellectual brain. The intellectual brain, well, I'll start with here. The reptilian brain, this is controlling our autonomic nervous system, and it's living in the present moment, and it's just responding to what is in the here and now. We evolved, we ended up with the limbic system, which is living in the present moment, but it's informed by the past. So yesterday I walked by there was a bear, a big brown lump. Now I know that I should be a little bit nervous or weary if I'm going to walk in that stump, because I have an association or a memory from yesterday that could be there. And now anytime I walk in the forest and I see a big brown log, a little part of me is going to jump because I associate it with the bear. So that's the emotional brain, the limbic system, and its language is its association and image. Okay. It's also where we get into complex social relationships. Okay. I'll talk about that in a second. So reptilian brain, present moment; limbic system, present moment and past, informed by the past; intellectual brain, the capacity to imagine a future and abstract thinking. Most times, a lot of the time, our thinking ends up getting motivated by what emotional insecurity we're having. And it's trying to use in that anticipation of what's possible to solve, how do I get rid of this feeling that I don't like, right? That's causing my body to feel something I don't like. But in theory, we should be using our intellectual centers for like design and beauty and like solving complex problems where we actually can have a choice in it, right? So the Bio-Emotive Framework a lot of its work is basically just getting all three of those systems to talk to each other and to become coherent. And I often say that the emotional system is the bridge between the present moment and the thoughts, right? And so you can start to relate to it in that way. Now, the language of the emotional system, or the limbic system, which is very closely tied to the nervous system and the vagus nerve, is feelings, sensations, and images. And this is where it's really important to recognize the limbic system came before rational thought. It came before the intellect. So you get rid of all of your complex thinking, and all you've got is your body's best guess as to what is going on. And its best guess is based on the association of what's happening now from the previous moment, from a previous circumstance. And so it's this very rudimentary like guessing game. Do they like me? Do they not like me? Am I safe here? Am I not safe here? Do I need to do this or should I do that? And for the most part, I would say before my dad's framework, this was ridiculously unconscious. So now what he's broken it into is there's interpersonal feelings, there's emotion, interpersonal feelings, and core feelings. So at any given moment, if you notice you're like feeling weird, or you're stuck on something, or you're ruminating about something, that's a cue that your nervous system is activated, and you want to go into the language of the emotional system to say, well, why am I activated? Then you start basically saying, oh, am I feeling helpless? Am I feeling hopeless? Am I feeling bad? And you run through the 9 core feelings: helpless, hopeless, worthless, bad, alone, inadequate, insignificant, lost and disoriented, or loss or empty. And you start just being able to do a very quick resonance check. Am I feeling one of these feelings? Am I secretly feeling one of these feelings inside of this situation? And if you can say it out loud, your body will respond with a very deep sigh of relaxation, or it will respond with getting more tense. And that also means your body is responding, but you're afraid of the acknowledgement, which is a cue that you want to go deeper. So where I'm going with that is, it's not logical. You will be in a circumstance with someone and you might know. So actually, I'll give a personal example. I know that the technical issues have nothing to do with me.
Not your fault.
But some part of me has this feeling, belief, that somehow I caused it. That's like classic psychology. Like it's the kid's fault that the parents divorced, right? So there's the discernment. I know it's not true. And yet if I actually check in, some part of me feels like I am contributing to the technical difficulties. And then we can go, well, wow, that's interesting. Why would I feel that way? And now I'm leaving the realm of reason behind. And I have to follow the language of the emotional system, which is, again, image, sensation, or emotion, or feeling. So I can be like, it's bringing up, well, I'm associating. I know logically it doesn't make sense. Prepared. Maybe I'm not prepared. Somehow the technical issues are happening because I have a fear of being unprepared. even though I know I was totally prepared for this. So it's like, okay, this isn't a rational issue. There's some sort of weird feeling belief that I'm carrying that I can look at and explore, right? And so I could keep exploring that right now, because I don't think we're going to, but it's an example of, this is its own language. The heart, the world of emotion and feeling is its own map, and no amount of trying to reason with it or override it will work. But if you can let the emotions or the feelings talk themselves through, express themselves through, then a bridge gets made between the intellect, your ability to reason, and the emotional system. And then things start to just make sense. So I don't know if I explain this as well as I do in our classes, but that's okay.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's a teaser. If you really, really want to learn it and really want to do it, you got to join Ali's. Yeah, the next crash course. I think like the piece, this is something I've been thinking about a lot, is this notion of intellectual development and relational or emotional development, and how they're kind of two different threads. And from my perspective, and this is true of me, I think, of like my experience, but it's also, I think, true of what I see in the world, is that there's an overemphasis on intellectual development, and like this notion of like going into the head, right? Like this movement, it's very familiar for me, but I think it's very familiar for a lot of people. And I see this in relationships with people. It's like there's this propensity to kind of go in the head that's very different than being in the emotions. And like you mentioned many times, that it's not rational, like the emotion is not rational, but there's this propensity to try to make sense of things or plan for the future. How do we make things better, right? Well, like that's kind of like the neocortex is like thinking ahead. How am I going to get off this island? How can I build this raft? Which is very different of like, well, how am I going to sit in this fire right now? How am I going to be here with what's here now? Two different movements, two different kind of things. I don't know if there's more you could, I'm sure there's a lot you could say about that, but I'm just curious, how do we more skillfully like kind of integrate these two aspects of our being?
Well, the intellect likes maps. So having a map of the emotional system is very helpful, because when you're in the fire, the mind likes to say, where am I? Where did I come from? And where can I go? And so on some level, that's what the framework does, is, oh, I'm activated. Oh, and I'm activated because it's bringing up this, and this. Oh, and I'm afraid of feeling this, and that. Oh, and so it's like a pointing out option. It's like a pointing out instruction of the mind to help you be able to be a little bit more at peace and a little bit less I need to run in those really, really strenuous moments. And I think it's hard for me to separate emotional work from spiritual work, because in my world, spiritual work has been learning the nature of the mind. Pardon me. And so it starts to create this sense of calm in the fire, because you're able to just be with the sensations and know, okay, I have a practice that I can do. And the more that I learn about the vagus nerve, it really is. It's like these core feelings it's not just, my dad says it's the language of the emotional system. I'm going to say the core feelings are the language of the vagus nerve. if you are in, dorsal or the fight flight one, the middle one, your body gets so grateful when you put words. There's something about putting words to what your experience is that somehow calms the vagus nerve. It just, there's a huge sigh of relief. And it's fascinating to me. I mean, it makes me get very interested about language processing and what all that's about. But the thing that I think just helps is if you know, okay, we're wired to feel 9 core feelings and they're opposites, then you just know, well, I should check the languaging for that and see if one of those things are coming up. Yeah. Yeah. Another thing, like in the more relational spaces, like people who are doing circling and so forth, I think there's ended up this very interesting disposition towards, if I have an issue, I have to hash it out interpersonally between me and another human. And I really don't think that that's the healthiest thing. I think it's really important that if you're having an issue, you need to be able to go within and map, why am I having this issue? Where is it coming from? At what moment did I start having this issue? How can I clear the charge from my body, aka the fight-flight response, the chemical dump, so that I can enter the relational situation in a state of relative calm. And so I don't know how people do this work without having personal emotional processing available, because what happens is you start dumping your emotional charge on other people. Now their nervous system is having to navigate not just their feelings, but your unspoken feelings of nervous system transmission. Nobody is co-regulating anybody there. You're amplifying the negativity. And I will say, in a really skilled space with really good facilitators, with people who have done a whole bunch of self-deconstruction work, you totally can find some resolve. But for the most part, people are not that well trained. And so it just becomes an unconscious need to dump nervous system charge onto other people in order for you to feel grounded, rather than to learn how to actually be grounded in your own nervous system, your own arisings, take responsibility for it, clear what you can, and then communicate the minimum viable communication that's needed in order for the relationship to progress in an ideal world. Yeah. Yeah. Interpersonal spaces can get messy. It, like, not in a cute way. Everyone kind of laughs when they say messy, and I'm like,
Yeah. I mean, I've heard circling being called, this is not a safe space, this is a brave space. So, and this is, I wanted to ask you this question, but and you basically answered it, but just like the way I was thinking about how they fit in, how maybe the emotional processing fits in with circling is, in the circling, you can get a lot of trigger, you can get a lot of material, you get a lot of fire, right? And then you could bring that into the emotional processing. So like, well, why was I so triggered by that person?
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. So I think because I've had to spend a lot of time thinking about this, I would say there's 3 ways. 1, you just recognize in the moment and quietly you process on your own. Oh, I noticed that I'm getting irritated with this person and I'm tuning out when they talk. I can just try to figure out why.
Yeah.
2, the whole group actually stops and they help you process if you actually have a group of people who know how to do it. And I find that that's what most people want. Personally, they just want help to process their feelings, which is why I created the Emotional Clearing Circle space. And then 3, you go through hell, you go through the circle, and then later you just process what the hell happened. and you try to, clean it up. But that was so that's part of why I created the Emotional Clearing Circle space, was well, one, I wanted to have a group process for emotional clearing that wasn't just therapy. But I was attending all of these relational spaces, and I got into this dilemma where I had to start marketing circling, which now we can't, it's not circling anymore, even though I had to start marketing it. And I was like, what? Well, I'm actually trained through T3, which is the one training that they're actually allowing to call yourself a circler, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
When I had to start marketing circling, everyone markets it as this like, be seen and heard and like loved and like supported and like find great connection. And it's like, all of that is true, but you're kind of, you're setting people up. Like, you don't like, there's kind of a weird accident that's happening in these marketing spaces. And so I had to get really, really clear. What are people coming to when I'm running these spaces? And finally, over time, I realized I just need a very gentle, specific space where everyone who's showing up is bought into lovingly supporting someone through their experience and helping them to feel their feelings. And if I feel triggered as a participant, or I have some sort of odd issue or grievance, I don't name it. It is not an interpersonal space for us to hash out our shadows and projections between each other in order to have a beautiful outcome. Circling, I now define circling as we're all showing up to consciously project and be projected on and navigate our transferences with very deep skillfulness in order for me to have profound breakthroughs and insights in who I am. And in order to be able to navigate those projections and transferences in a way, and messy spaces in a way that I actually do have a breakthrough, I actually have to have a whole bunch of skill sets. And one of those skill sets needs to be the ability to just listen and see and hear somebody and try to get their world and try to get their reality. If I can do that, then I can start bringing my projection or my assumption or my story about somebody. And then we can start dancing that dance together. And then I call that Dharma combat. It's like, it's the profound dance of our fucking personality structures, pardon my language. And we're like going for it. And we're enjoying the dissection and the like, let me see if I was projecting. Like, let me see if I've got something. But there's this buy-in to, I want to do the inner work to see if I'm bringing something to the table that's causing dysfunction. But man, it's like, I call them, like, I have a space. It's called the Relational Dojo for a reason. Like, it's dojo work. Like we're buying in to sparring with each other, and we might get punched in the face and it might hurt. And I just want to know that we can actually take care of each other afterwards. And we're not actually here to like punch each other in the face. Like, we're here to spar and we're here to grow, right? So create, like, having the clearing circle space, there's a certain type of mastery in just being able to lovingly listen to someone and put yourself aside and get curious about, hey, I wonder if there's a core feeling hidden inside of that story. Can we invite in helplessness and see what that feels like? So they're very complementary, obviously. But for me, there's a difference. It's just the space is different. The you're buying into a different thing.
Yeah. Like, and there's a lot coming up, but like one of the things is inadvertently, I think people come to circling sometimes, and it's often said circling is not therapy, but a lot of times I feel like it can become that. And once again, people can have very therapeutic effects from it and get a lot of healing. But sometimes there can be this, I'm coming here, I need people to hold space for me. Like that's kind of the energy. So it seems like the emotional clearing is like, yeah, like this is the space for that. Let's do this. And then you could come more cleaned up and just show up and be more in the relational dynamic without having this neediness of I need to be the focus and I need people to hold space for me and I need people to love me and I need this connection. Like this is the other thing. It's like, if you want connection, you got to be willing to risk disconnection because there's no connection without disconnection. You're going to have both of them. That's just how it works. And if you're attached, like I did it once a little while ago, I did an in-person session, circling like thing. And like one person ended up showing up and this girl, like she was so committed to like having connection and wanting connection. And the thing she wasn't realizing is like her unwillingness to be in this connection was actually messing up her ability to have connection.
And that's the beauty. Like that's the beauty. I do really believe circling, like the things that a lot of what circling is trying to point to is profound, right? How the micro is reflecting the macro, right? Like your ability to be in disconnection is causing an inability to connect. Like, whoa. But I think there's also something that happens where very experienced people who aren't facilitating and aren't taking a certain role of like, I'm going to grace you into something. I think they have certain experiences that then they immediately kind of like put on the new people, and the new people haven't had the internal scaffolding or the internal experiences to be able to meet these more experienced circles where they are. And then that's where I think some damage can start to happen. So it's like this awkward in between of experienced, but not experienced enough to actually be helpful to the new people. So it's like a self-centered.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't mean that in a rude way, but it's, you just haven't quite gotten meta enough to be able to support like these, right? And I think that's where some of the spaces, I really believe that, so at this point you can't even refer to circling because everyone has created their own version of it to such a degree that at this point people are like, that's not circling. I don't know what you're talking about. And honestly, I don't want to spend my time trying to define what other people are doing, and if it is or isn't circling. But I will say, but that's gotten me really clear on what I offer. I'm like, I'm just learning to stand what I offer and what I believe in and what I value and what I want to transmit. And I don't have to spend time trying to articulate it for other people. But I will say, I think there is a lot of pieces of circling lineage of people who had very deep Vipassana experiences. And when you're able to rest in a certain field of awareness, maybe deeper than an opinion or deeper than someone's emotion, you can really start to do really incredible personality deconstruction work. But if you don't have, this is kind of circling back to what I said earlier, if you don't have the ability to rest in that field, then everything that's coming up can become very problematic. And I think I actually I did some videos on this on my YouTube, because so if people are interested, they should go listen to that, because I articulate it much more better than I am right now, much more better. But people just started off with a lot of skills and capacities and deconstruction work prior to coming to these circles. And they took for granted, I think, how skilled and self-aware the other participants were. And they didn't realize when they go home to try to run their own groups how much invisible behind the scenes self-work was actually present in that workshop. So then you start saying the same words. Oh, we're going to welcome everything. Oh, we're going to stay in connection. But those words don't land in the same way in these new people. And people would get into these very incredible, I'm going to say, Dharma combat experiences where it is a fight. It's brutal. You are going at each other, but with a certain self-awareness and capacity to recognize kind of like the game of it all. But if you try to replicate that with a whole bunch of people that don't have a bunch of deconstruction work already, it just becomes fighting. It just becomes people hitting each other, right? So yeah, it's a whole thing.
Yeah, no, I really resonate with that. This notion of you having certain experiences, or you even being skilled in a certain way, but then not skilled enough to navigate when you have beginners, and then it just creates unhelpful dynamics. So that definitely makes sense. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there too. I feel like in regards to like you were saying, deconstructive work and circling and like healing and how those things may overlap. I feel like there's a lot we could speak about there, but I do want to kind of start wrapping up a little bit. And I wanted to ask you, I see it as the task of each new generation to learn something from the previous one while also contributing something new of their own. And I'm curious, are there any aspects of your father's work or his approach to working with emotions that you've come to see differently over time? And is there anything you feel called to add or build upon in your own way?
Great question as well. I'm sure there are things. I think I'm getting more into understanding the polyvagal theory. I'm always, truth is true. So they must somehow overlap and work together. So I'm starting to just say more and more, like, I think these feelings are actually the language of the vagus nerve, like specifically, and that a lot of the somatic work just needs the articulation. Yeah. I think I probably do it all the time when I'm teaching, just like share my opinions. Nothing specific is coming to my mind right now, I hate to say. But I think a way that I apply it, which I had mentioned in our class together, is I'm really interested in the Brahma Viharas. And so it's just like, what is between me and loving kindness right now, as an example. And usually there's a feeling belief. Usually there's some sort of wound or self-protection mechanism that's coming up. And, what's between me and skillfulness? Okay, I have to learn how to use my voice. Why am I afraid to use my voice? Why am I afraid to stand up for myself? Where does that part of my conditioning come from? So, yeah, I think that's a big piece for me. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. And maybe you can point people to kind of the spaces where they can interact with you. I mean, I'm gonna add links and everything to the show notes, but it'd be helpful if you could, do you have some courses coming up? You mentioned the Relational Dojo. How can people kind of interact with you and get a taste of this work that you're doing? Yeah, that's wonderful.
Thank you. So we have the Bio-Emotive So there's no the, just Bio-Emotive We have a crash course happening in the fall, and then the emotional clearing circles. Once you know the framework, you can join the emotional clearing circles. That'll be starting the last week of September. And then I run the Relational Dojo, which is also online. You can go to alitataryn.com and find that. It's right now we haven't gotten into the deep sparring. I'm still kind of teaching people just like communication skills and kind of resting in that. But my father's also on Substack, Dr. Doug. And then I've just started a Substack, Ali Tataryn, under Dharma Door and Relational Dojo as well. So yeah, that's lovely.
Cool. Yeah, I'm going to definitely link. I'm going to put all those links there so people will have it. Yeah, Ali, I really appreciate you coming on, and this was so fun. I mean, I think we spent like maybe an hour just like unpacking like childhood stuff and like what it was like for you to grow up and what it was like acting and, you know, what it was like for me to pursue rap and how, you know, all this kind of interacts and intersects. And yeah, and then we got a little bit into the Bio-Emotive Framework and, you know, how do we channel all this intensity and this emotion and expression in a way that gives us coherence and wholeness. So yeah, this was a fun conversation. Is there anything else that you want to say before we wrap up?
No, this was just a great time. I love that we got to talk a little bit about art as well, with like a fellow curiosity in that world. No, this was just great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Appreciate you.
Thank you.